A computer-generated space-like setting with a sun in the background. Spike, a cute German Shepherd cartoon service animal, rides in a round spaceship and flies toward the camera, followed by a quick transition where Spike's spaceship flies off the screen and enters a more realistic scene of outer space with planets and stars slowly moving towards the camera.
Hi, kids! We're going to talk about something really cool and even out of this world today: virtual reality, or VR. In VR, you can be anywhere you want to be.
A man puts on virtual reality goggles, and the background behind him changes from his living room to a virtual scene with characters and computer generated shapes.
I love being in a spaceship. Basically, by putting on special equipment like a headset and using a handset or gloves, you can feel like you are in a three-dimensional world that is actually made by using computers. While that's awesome, what I want to show you today is that some of my friends are working to make sure that virtual reality is accessible so it can be used by people with all types of disabilities.
Spike's spaceship flies around a planet and zooms toward the camera.
I'm going to slam this spaceship into hyperdrive so I can take you to Cornell Tech in New York City. Let's go!
Spike stands in a large room at Cornell Tech with a lot of seats behind him. He stands next to Dylan Fox. Camera angles change between wide and tight shots of them.
All right, now I'm with my good friend Dylan Fox. Dylan, I'm learning a lot here. Tell our friends who are watching more about VR.
Thanks, Mike. So virtual reality is fascinating. It is what we call it when you put on a headset or step into a cave and all of a sudden there's a whole new reality around you. You might be transported from your living room to outer space or to practice being a firefighter or all kinds of things. It's really an incredible technology, and that's why we want to make sure that everybody can use it.
Dylan, tell me about the work happening to make sure virtual reality can be used by people with disabilities.
Well, the thing to know about accessibility is the idea that lots of different people have lots of different things that they can and can't do. And that could be somebody who uses a wheelchair, that could be somebody who maybe has trouble hearing or trouble seeing or trouble speaking. So when we talk about making things accessible, we mean making it easier to use for everybody, no matter what kind of ability they have.
Quick transition to Spike in front of a whiteboard. The words making things accessible appear on the board next to Spike with a picture of a store. Then a poof of smoke appears and a ramp appears leading to the front door.
Kids, when we talk about making things accessible, we mean making things so as many people as possible can use them. For example, if there is a step leading up to a store, you could add a ramp to make the store accessible. So someone using a wheelchair could roll inside. When we are talking about making computers, video games, or virtual reality accessible, that's done by creating programs and software that will allow anyone to use it. Like people who are blind, or maybe people who can't move their heads or hands.
Quick transition back to the conference room with Spike and Dylan.
And that's really important for a cool technology like virtual reality because, for example, a lot of people might assume that you need to be able to see to use virtual reality. But people that are blind still have all kinds of other senses available to them, right? They have hearing, they have touch, they have smell, although I don't think we're quite close to getting that in VR just yet. But when people who are making the virtual reality applications, the software and the hardware, when those people think about everybody, it makes it so that nobody gets left out and everybody is able to use these really cool new technologies.
Right now, I want you to meet some of the people who are working to make virtual reality accessible.
A man with virtual reality goggles moves his hand and the scene around him changes, followed by a middle school aged boy wearing VR glasses.
Virtual reality is really neat and takes us into a different world. But it's not just a game, it's being used to help teach people about new things and even how to do their jobs better. People who work in the healthcare field, like doctors, can use it to practice surgeries. People who work in the automotive industry can learn how to build and repair cars. And there are many other ways it's being used every day.
A large conference room full of people.
This conference at Cornell Tech in New York City brings people together so they can learn and show each other how they are making virtual reality accessible for people with disabilities.
On one side of the screen, a man wears VR goggles. The other side shows what he is seeing. A coffee shop with a computer generated worker using American Sign Language behind the counter.
Check this out. Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. is a college for deaf and hard of hearing students. They have created a virtual reality game called ASL, or American Sign Language Champ, so people can learn and practice sign language.
In ASL Champ, a user can learn introductory ASL from a fluent signing avatar. So it's as if you arrive in a coffee shop and you can learn from this fluent signing character some simple ASL vocabulary in context. And the big development in our recent work is that the game can give you feedback about if you're signing correctly or incorrectly.
Christian Marino and his team are working so that people who can't use their arms or hands, or who aren't able to turn their heads, can also take part in virtual reality.
Typically, most movement in VR is kind of has the implication that you are fully able and you can fully, move your arms or can stand up comfortably. If you have any motor disabilities, like if you can't raise your arms or move your neck correctly in a certain way, then basically there are no systems, no accessibility settings that you can have for where you can do that. So essentially you're out of luck, you can't use VR. We're working to change that. We don't have a full solution yet, but the goal is to have a solution and an option for people to have minimal interaction in VR as much as we can.
A virtual reality game that has a control panel on the bottom of the screen that reads move forward, turn left, or turn right.
Andy Slater is blind. He is one of the few blind people who is working with VR. He says people with disabilities shouldn't just be testing or using technology, they should also be creating it.
Are blind people involved in creating this as opposed to just testing it, right? Really pushing for creative tools and that sort of thing to be more accessible so that we can make stuff.
Spike and Dylan are back in the conference room.
We're back at the conference. Dylan, before the next session begins, what else do you want kids to know about making virtual reality or other technologies so that everyone can use it?
There's two kinds of accessibility we think about. The first one is that idea of mainstream accessibility, that for any application, anybody should be able to use it. But there's another kind of accessibility too that's called assistive technology. And the idea there is that there may be tools that people who, say somebody who can see pretty well already doesn't need, but somebody who's blind, they could benefit a lot from, a device that maybe looks out in the world and reads the text that's written on walls or helps them find their way to their next appointment. When we think about all the ways that we can use virtual reality, we shouldn't just be thinking about what's helpful or fun for people that are abled. We should be thinking about it for people that are disabled as well, and how all of the special things that this tech can do can be helpful for everybody.
Dylan, that's really important. Kids, when Dylan just mentioned people who are abled, that's another way of saying people who don't have a disability. Next time when you are making things in school, think about if they're accessible. And if you are on a computer, try out some of the accessibility settings that are built into them so you can learn more about them.
This was brought to you by funding from the National Institute of Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research.